Picture a species everyone considers a conservation success story. Numbers climbing back up, hunting bans working, habitat slowly recovering. On paper, it looks saved. But there is a signal hiding underneath that recovery you cannot see just by counting animals. And it might be quietly working against everything that success story promised. That hidden signal is genetic diversity. Here is the question this video sits with. What if a population can look like it is bouncing back, while it is actually running out of the raw material it needs to survive the next disease, the next drought, the next hard winter? Think of genetic diversity as a species library of options. Every individual carries a slightly different mix of genetic variants, like different editions of the same book, and that variety is what lets a population adapt when the environment throws something new at it. Lose enough of that variety and the whole population starts reading from the exact same page. A disease that one individual could have resisted suddenly threatens everyone equally, because nobody carries the version that would have protected them. Ever wonder how two completely unrelated cheetahs could swap skin grafts and have the tissue survive like it came from an identical twin? That result should be biologically impossible between two strangers. It only works because, deep in the past, cheetahs as a species nearly vanished, and every cheetah alive today descends from a tiny surviving handful. A more recent version of the same story played out on a single island in Lake Superior, where wolves and moose lived, cut off from the mainland for decades. The island's wolf population shrank down to a genetically stranded handful, all closely related. Bone deformities started showing up. Litters got smaller. By the 2010s, the island's wolves were sliding toward total collapse. So wildlife managers did something that sounds almost too simple. They brought in new wolves from the mainland, carrying fresh genes the island population no longer had. That single fix, adding a handful of outsiders with different genes, was enough to turn a collapsing population around within a few years. It would not be the last time researchers saw that exact fix work. The same kind of rescue played out with Florida panthers in the 1990s, when the population had crashed to somewhere around 20 or 30 animals, all closely related, riddled with heart defects. Not every near miss ends the same way, though. A small forest bird on a remote Pacific island once dropped to a single fertile female, the entire future of the species resting on one bird. The species survived. Its numbers climbed back into the hundreds, but it carries almost no genetic variety at all today, a living reminder that a population can recover in headcount while staying frozen in place genetically, maybe permanently. Wildlife biologists brought in a handful of mountain lions from Texas to introduce fresh genes, and the population's health rebounded within a few years. Each of these rescues follows the exact same shape. A population nearly disappears. Its genetic variety collapses right along with it, and bringing in outsiders reverses the slide. Which raises an uncomfortable follow-up question. If this pattern keeps showing up every time researchers happen to look closely at one struggling species, how many other species are heading toward that same cliff without anyone having checked yet? Counting animals themselves has gotten remarkably easy. Camera traps, aerial surveys, tagged individuals, population numbers are something conservationists track constantly, with real confidence. Genetic diversity is invisible in every one of those methods. You cannot see it in a photo or a head count. The only way to measure it is to go all the way down to the DNA itself. A blood sample from a tagged wolf, a feather dropped by a migrating songbird, a fin clip from a fish released back into a river. That is what this kind of evidence actually looks like. And that evidence does not come from one coordinated project. It is scattered across tens of thousands of individual scientific papers, published over more than 3 decades, using different lab methods on different continents. So here is a question worth sitting with. Has anyone ever actually pulled all of that scattered evidence together into one picture at a genuinely global scale? Or are cheetahs, island wolves, and Florida panthers just rare, dramatic exceptions, and most wildlife out there is doing just fine underneath the surface? It matters more than it sounds. International governments have already written commitments to protect genetic diversity into global biodiversity agreements, promising to safeguard it right alongside species and ecosystems. But a promise like that is worthless without a reliable answer to a simpler question first. Is genetic diversity actually being lost? And if so, where and in which animals? There is also a nasty feedback loop hiding inside all of this, something scientists call an extinction vortex. A shrinking population loses genetic variety. Less genetic variety means the population adapts worse to disease, drought, or a changing climate. Adapting worse means the population shrinks further and loses even more variety faster. Once that spiral gets going, it is brutally hard to stop from the outside, which is exactly why catching the early signs matters so much more than reacting once it is already too late. If you had to guess right now, would you say wildlife around the world is winning this genetic battle or quietly losing it? If stories like this, real science quietly uncovering a threat that population counts alone would never catch, are the kind of thing you enjoy, hit subscribe. There is a new one here every week. So which is it? A team of conservation geneticists set out to actually answer that at a scale nobody had attempted before. Not one species, not one region, every usable measurement of genetic change over time they could dig out of the scientific record, across the entire animal, plant, and fungal kingdoms worldwide. The scale of the search alone is hard to picture. Tens of thousands of scientific papers screened by hand, spanning more than 3 decades of published research. Most of those papers turned out to be useless for this particular question, mentioning genetics in passing or looking at a single point in time with nothing to compare it against. Only a small slice of that enormous pile actually tracked the same population's genes across real time, and that slice still ended up being enormous. Hundreds of species, dozens of classes, nearly every corner of the planet represented. Before we get to what they found, take a guess. Do you think the picture turned out to be reassuring, alarming, or somewhere frustratingly in between? Here is what the picture actually looked like once every scrap of that evidence was combined into a single analysis. On average, across that entire dataset, wild populations really are losing genetic diversity over time. The drop is small on average, but it shows up so consistently across such an enormous dataset that it is extremely unlikely to be random noise. Break it down by group, and the picture sharpens. Birds came out losing the most genetic diversity of any well-sampled group, with mammals close behind. Flowering plants, insects, and ray-finned fish showed no significant average change at all. At least not yet. That does not mean they are in the clear. Genetic losses can lag years or even decades behind a population's actual decline, especially in long-lived species with still large total numbers. A stable reading today does not rule out trouble already quietly building underneath. Roughly 2 out of every 3 populations in the dataset had at least one documented threat during the years they were studied, mostly habitat loss, hunting, or other human pressure. And it was not only the usual suspects. Even populations with no reported threat at all still showed a small average loss, a kind of quiet background erosion tied to living in a world reshaped by people, whether or not any single obvious danger got flagged. Fewer than half of all the populations studied received any kind of active conservation help at all. So what actually works? Out of every conservation strategy researchers tested, only one was reliably linked to genetic diversity actually going back up. It was supplementation, physically adding new individuals into a struggling population, the exact same fix that saved the wolves on that island in Lake Superior and the panthers in Florida. Everything else, legal protection on its own, breeding programs, emergency feeding, still showed an average net loss when the numbers were run. That is not necessarily a strike against those other strategies. They tend to get used on populations already in freefall. So even a genuine improvement can still look like a net loss in the raw numbers. The researchers are careful to call this a correlational picture built from real-world data, not a controlled experiment, so it cannot prove any single action alone caused any single outcome in isolation. But the pattern lines up with every case study that opened this video. Bring in fresh genes, and a population's odds improve. Leave a shrinking population isolated, and the slide usually continues quietly, well below anything a simple headcount would ever catch. You can find the full study, with every species, every region, and every number, linked in the description below. So the next time you hear that a species is bounced back, remember that a rising headcount is only half the story, And the part that decides its future for generations might be a part nobody thought to check.